Hey, you made it. Welcome back. If you're one of the folks who drifted off with Willem and Edith last time, I hope you're lying there right now with your favorite blanket and at least one leg completely outside of it, because you live dangerously, and I respect that. Now listen, we're doing something a little different with this one. Today, I'm sharing the ultimate guide to the best sleep hacks medieval peasants used. And yes, it sounds ridiculous. But you know what's more ridiculous? That we're out here in 2025 using noise machines, blackout curtains, sleep tracking rings, and still waking up feeling like a disappointed potato. Meanwhile, peasants with no insulation and a floor made of dirt were sleeping like medieval babies. So maybe, just maybe, they knew something we don't. And I'm gonna walk you through all of it, slowly, quietly, one story at a time. So while you're settling in, take a second, hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet, and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love reading those at absurd hours when I should be asleep, like a responsible adult. Let's start with the first and most essential hack: physical exhaustion so complete that sleep wasn't optional, it was gravitational. Meet Beatrice, a flax spinner in the village of Crowthorne. Beatrice wakes up before the sun because the sun is lazy and she isn't. Her morning routine consists of stepping over 3 chickens, narrowly avoiding a chamber pot, and pulling on a wool dress that hasn't been washed since the last saint's day. Before she's even thought about breakfast, which is, let's be honest, probably a crust and a prayer, she's already collected firewood, carried water from the stream, and swept the hearth. By noon, she's spun enough flax to knit a full gilt blanket, tended to a blister on her heel using mud, and helped birth a calf that wasn't hers. And now she's got to make dinner, which will be a glorious medley of turnip, and something that might have once been a leek. By the time the sun even thinks about setting, Beatrice isn't asking herself if she should scroll TikTok for another 45 minutes. She's thinking, if I sit down for more than 4 seconds, I will enter a coma and possibly never return. And that, my friend, is exactly what happens. See, one of the peasants' greatest sleep tricks was earning their sleep through the art of complete bodily devastation. No sleep tracker needed. If your feet are numb and your spine feels like a cursed ladder, you're not lying awake with thoughts. You're dreaming before your eyes even close. Now, let's talk about co-sleeping. But not the cute kind. In medieval peasant households, sleeping arrangements were democratic. And by that I mean everyone in the same room, often on the same straw pile, with zero concept of personal space and a goat for ambiance. Beatrice doesn't sleep alone. She sleeps alongside her 2 children, her cousin's child, who just kind of stayed, her husband, and a sheep named Agatha, who refuses to sleep anywhere else. The warmth, amazing. The smell, questionable. But it worked. Body heat in a cold, damp world was currency, and they traded it generously. You might think that'd be distracting. And it was, especially when someone snored like a dying ox or kicked in their sleep. But here's the thing. They didn't expect perfect silence. That's a modern luxury. They expected the sounds of life, of breathing and creaking wood, and the occasional fart from Agatha. And somehow, that made the room feel safer, calmer. They weren't chasing stillness. They were held by it. Another elite hack: darkness. Like real, uncut, no light pollution darkness. There were no streetlights, no glowing phone screens, no bathroom nightlight flickering like an anxious ghost. When night fell, it fell. Beatrice's cottage was lit only by the embers of the fire, maybe a tallow candle if they were feeling fancy. Her eyes weren't just resting, they were being bathed in darkness, which tells your brain very politely, go to sleep, idiot. It works. It worked for centuries. And here's where it gets even weirder. Medieval peasants often slept in 2 chunks. Yup, segmented sleep. Around sundown, they'd pass out hard for a few hours, wake up around midnight, chat, pray, maybe get frisky if Agatha wasn't looking, and then go back to sleep until morning. That midnight window, it was sacred, calm, not considered insomnia. Just the quiet part between dreams. That space is gone for us now, filled with scrolling and stress and to-do lists and existential dread. But Beatrice, she wakes briefly, hears the fire cracking low, shifts under the wool, and maybe mumbles something to her husband, like, "Remind me to fix the door hinge tomorrow." Then she's out again. Tell me that isn't genius. And let's not forget one of my favorite medieval sleep aids, herbs. Oh yes, Beatrice isn't just snuggling her way into unconsciousness. She's hanging bundles of lavender, chamomile, and mugwort from the rafters like a sleepy little forest witch. She doesn't know the science. She doesn't care. She just knows that when the room smells like crushed rosemary, her kids stop twitching and she stops dreaming about wolves. Some herbs were believed to ward off spirits. Others were said to bring good dreams. And some were probably just smokable. But either way, the house smelled like someone who believed rest was worth preparing for. So there you go. That's where we start. Hack 1, be too exhausted to think. Hack 2, co-sleep with everyone, possibly livestock. Hack 3, let true darkness reset your brain. Hack 4, segmented sleep is not a glitch, it's a feature. Hack 5, herbs. Hang 'em, brew 'em, dream with 'em. And remember, Beatrice didn't have melatonin gummies. She had raw physical labor, a goat, and the unshakable belief that if she didn't sleep now, she wouldn't survive the next turnip season. And somehow, it worked better than anything you'll find at a wellness store. Still with me? Still floating in that slow rhythm, curled up in your own version of medieval coziness? If you are, I'll keep going. So, now that you know the basics, being physically ruined by sunset, sleeping with all your loved ones, and at least one judgmental farm animal, embracing pitch black darkness, waking up at midnight like it's a scheduled intermission, and marinating your sleep area in herbs, you'd think that's the end of medieval peasant sleep magic. Oh no, we're just getting comfortable. Let's talk about one of the most underrated sleep hacks from this era, seasonal sleep surrender. That's right, medieval peasants were not, as some modern motivational gurus might put it, grinding through the winter. They weren't doing cold plunges at 5 a.m. and conquering anything. They were hibernating like sentient potatoes. Let's go back to our girl Beatrice. It's January. The fields are frozen, the paths are iced over, the air hurts. And Beatrice, being a professional in the art of not dying, takes the most obvious approach. She slows down, way down. Wake time, later than usual. Workload, reduced to whatever doesn't involve frostbite or soul loss. Daylight is minimal, warmth is a rumor, and food is rationed. So of course the best option is to just sleep more. That's right. She's not lazy. She's economically unconscious. And the best part? Society expected this. They were allowed to rest more in winter. Not just because they were tired, but because everyone from nobility to the dude with one boot understood that winter was for survival, not productivity. Imagine living in a world where your boss expected you to sleep more in winter. And sure, there were some tasks. Fixing tools, feeding animals, avoiding death, but no one was shaming peasants for sleeping 12 hours in January. That was just called not freezing to death. Now, let's discuss the bed itself. You're probably picturing something romantic, rustic, maybe hand-carved out of oak, covered in furs and linen. Stop. Just stop. Beatrice sleeps on a straw mattress that is actively composting beneath her, stuffed with last season's chaff and hope. Some families even shared a literal hay pile with everyone crashing in their corner like it's some sort of sad, medieval Airbnb. But, and this is important, it worked. Straw was breathable. It was insulating. It was available. And best of all, it could be burned and replaced when it got too funky. Hygiene? No. Strategy? Yes. And don't worry, They upgraded eventually. In better years, the mattress stuffing evolved into feathers. If you were rich or bracken, if you lived near a forest and weren't afraid of bugs. Bracken had a springy texture and even a smell that repelled pests. So if you ever end up sleeping on ferns in the woods, just know you're being historically accurate. Now here's a fun one. Bed curtains. You've seen them in movies, rich people closing their ornate canopies. But even peasants had their version. If Beatrice had a decent year, she might have hung up some old cloth, or even stitched together rags around the sleeping space to block out drafts. This wasn't for luxury, it was thermal insulation. In a one-room cottage, every scrap of fabric was a fortress against the wind. And let me tell you, once you've bundled into a straw nest, under 3 layers of wool, inside a curtain cocoon with your husband, 2 kids, and an angry goat snoring at your feet, your body doesn't ask to stay awake. It shuts down like a medieval Windows update. Speaking of bundling, let's talk sleep clothes. Or, more accurately, the single garment you wore all day, then all night, then again the next day until spring. Beatrice isn't slipping into silk pajamas. She's in a heavy wool shift, maybe a second one in winter. Layers were life. She's probably got socks on if she's lucky, and a coif or linen cap to keep her head warm. The goal? Preserve every molecule of body heat. Looking cute? That's for rich people and ghosts. Even kids were bundled, like regretful burritos. Parents would literally tie them into their blankets to keep them still, like some kind of medieval swaddle hog-tie hybrid. It sounds intense, but hey, it kept them warm and unconscious. Now here's a darker one, and maybe my favorite. They slept like people who knew they might not wake up. I mean that literally. Before falling asleep, it was common to say a prayer asking for safe passage through the night. As in, if I die before I wake, and they meant it. Death wasn't some distant concept. It lived next door, sometimes in your lungs, sometimes in your soup. But that didn't mean they feared sleep. It meant they respected it. Going to bed was crossing into something sacred. A small death, a holy pause. So every night, they let go with intention, with surrender, with a whispered prayer and a house full of soft breathing. And I think that's the biggest sleep hack of all. Not the straw, not the herbs, not even the goat, but the idea that rest was not a privilege or a hobby. It was survival. It was sacred. It was allowed. So if you're still lying there now, half draped in your blanket, listening as your eyes blink slower and your thoughts melt at the edges, maybe give yourself the same permission to rest like a peasant, to sleep like it's your only job, to lie down without guilt, without the noise, without the nonsense. Just you, the dark, and the breath that says you made it through another day. And if you're not asleep yet, good, because I've got more where that came from. Let's go deeper. Because, sure, we've talked about the how straw mattresses bundled kids, co-sleeping with half the population of a barn. But what made medieval sleep really work was the when timing was everything. Here's the truth. Medieval peasants didn't sleep on modern schedules because modern schedules didn't exist. Beatrice wasn't trying to sync her REM cycle with a 9 to 5 and a 6 p.m. bear class. She had sunlight and instinct. Her body told her when to rest, and her world allowed it. Radical idea, I know, but imagine a life where you fall asleep when it's dark, and wake up when it's light, and no one calls you lazy for doing that. Imagine a culture where sleeping when tired isn't considered weak. It's just life. You see, they followed what we'd now call a circadian rhythm, but they didn't need a YouTube biohacker to explain it to them. Their exposure to natural light, real soft dawn and dusk light, meant their melatonin wasn't getting kicked in the teeth by LED bulbs or late-night doom scrolling. They didn't lie awake trying to hack sleep. Their eyes told their brains, "It's dark now," and their brains said, "Cool, let's shut down." No second guessing. And you know what they didn't have? Alarms. No medieval peasant ever woke up to the sound of a digital banshee screaming from their nightstand. They woke up because the chickens did, or the sun, or more often, the fact that someone was already walking past their face with a log and no regard for boundaries. But the pressure to wake up before you're ready, that came centuries later, along with cubicles and performance reviews. This leads us to another subtle but powerful peasant sleep advantage: flexibility. Beatrice didn't live by the clock. Her world was ruled by seasons and sunrises. If she needed to nap during the day, she did. It wasn't slacking, it was practical. Sometimes she'd sleep twice in the same night. Sometimes she'd nap by the fire while her stew simmered. No shame, no hustle guilt. Just following the rhythm of a body that's been hauling water and chopping roots for hours. This is where we, modern humans, get it all twisted. We tell ourselves sleep has to happen in one perfect 8-hour stretch. Ideally in a room at exactly 67 degrees with white noise and blackout curtains. And when that fails, as it often does, we panic, we spiral. But Beatrice, she'd just roll over, grunt, and pick up her sleep again like she dropped a spoon. There was no drama around being awake, because she knew she'd sleep again, soon. And maybe that's the lesson we need most. That sleep isn't something to win, it's something to return to. Like a home, like a routine, like the sound of fire crackling low while the wind noses at the shutters and the goat sighs from across the room. Because peasant sleep wasn't about perfection, it was about survival wrapped in simplicity. It was physical exhaustion softened by community. It was rough, earthy, and deeply human. So if you're lying there now, eyes half-lidded, wondering if this is the moment your brain lets go, maybe just let it. You don't have to force it. No one's judging. No one's watching. This isn't a competition. It's just a ritual. And like Beatrice, you don't need to do it perfectly. You just need to do it with presence. Still breathing softly? Still here with me in the dark? Good. There's more to say. Let's take it even further. Because sleep wasn't just something peasants did. It was one of the only things they truly owned. Think about it. Their land, rented, their harvest, taxed, their tools, shared, borrowed, sometimes broken, but their sleep, that was theirs. Untaxed, unmeasured, unbothered, unless the goat sat on them. And you know what else? They didn't have options. No, should I scroll for another hour? No, maybe I'll get up and check my email. No emails, no scrolling, no soft glow of consumer-grade anxiety radiating from a pocket-sized dopamine slot machine. They had night, just night, and maybe a candle that was literally too expensive to burn unless someone was giving birth or actively dying. Which meant sleep was their entertainment, their recovery, their medicine, their escape. Not just rest, refuge. Let's go back to Beatrice. She's 37 now, which, in medieval terms, makes her an immortal crone with forbidden knowledge. Her joints hurt in a predictive sort of way. She can tell when rain's coming just by breathing, and that makes sleep even more important. Not optional. Not a wellness strategy. A physical reset button. By the end of the day, she's done her usual. Walked to the stream, hauled back water, plucked 4 feathers from an uncooperative hen, bartered for salt, made a broth out of things modern chefs wouldn't touch with gloves, and still managed to soothe a child with a fever, using a rag and a song that doesn't have real words. And now, with the cottage finally quiet, she lies down. But she doesn't rush to sleep. That's another thing we've forgotten. Peasants weren't scared of lying still. They didn't panic about falling asleep fast. There were no apps measuring their sleep efficiency. No one yelling about REM cycles on a podcast. Lying in bed, staring at the dark, that was normal. That was part of it. And what did they think about while they drifted? Not their inbox, not deadlines, not doom. They thought about whether the onions would come up early this year, whether Milda was really cursed or just bitter, whether the rooster had a soul, and if so, why it was this angry. These weren't problems to solve. They were thoughts to float on. Now, let's talk dreams. Because medieval folks didn't treat dreams like random nonsense. They treated them like messages, like symbols. They believed dreams came from God or spirits or the stew you shouldn't have eaten. They'd share dreams over breakfast. I dreamt of 3 geese in a pond could be the start of a theological debate. I dreamt Milda turned into a wolf, might get Milda excommunicated. Beatrice once dreamt she was flying, not with wings, but by climbing an invisible staircase into the clouds. The next day, she told her husband. He said that meant she was going to have a good harvest, or die. It was hard to tell. Interpretations were a bit loose. But here's the point. Dreams mattered. They made the night feel bigger than just sleep. They made it feel alive. And speaking of alive, let's go darker for a second. You knew it was coming. Because not everything about medieval peasant sleep was wholesome and herbal. Sometimes they had to sleep through sickness, through grief, through cold nights, where the wind howled like something wasn't quite human. They slept while rats skittered in the walls and the outside world got a little smaller each year. And they didn't always have comfort, or answers, or endings, but they still slept. They still closed their eyes, wrapped themselves in whatever cloth hadn't been chewed through, and trusted that rest was worth it, even if the world didn't feel safe. There's something deeply human in that, this small, almost rebellious act of lying down and surrendering, even when everything is uncertain, maybe especially then. So, if you're here now on your back or your side, maybe with one headphone in, blanket halfway over your foot, know this: you're not that different. The bed's different, the century's different, but the body is the same, still tired, still trying, still aching for peace. Sleep, in its oldest form, was about trust. Trusting the night, trusting yourself, trusting that tomorrow would show up and that you'd have the strength to meet it. Mud, turnips, goats, and all. So let yourself go, like Beatrice. Not because the day was easy, but because rest is part of the work. The good part, the warm part, the sacred part. Still with me? Still hearing these words somewhere behind your eyes? Good. Let's take a look at another unspoken medieval sleep hack, one that's rarely talked about in textbooks because it isn't glamorous or mystical or particularly hygienic, but it worked. Ready? It's called getting over it. That's right, getting over the idea that sleep had to be perfect. Modern life teaches us to treat sleep like a fragile glass ornament. Did I sleep the full 8? Was it deep sleep? Did I fall asleep too fast, which actually means I'm sleep deprived? Beatrice didn't think like that. Beatrice didn't have time for that. If she had a bad night, she didn't spiral. She just got up, lived her day, and trusted the next night would be better. Sleep was a river, not a test. Maybe the fire went out in the middle of the night, and she woke up freezing. Maybe her youngest rolled over and slapped her in the eye. Maybe Gertrude the goat wandered too close to the bed again and let out one of those slow, horrifying midnight bleats. Whatever it was, she didn't interpret it as failure. It just happened. She adjusted. And eventually she slept again. She always did. Now let's talk about the relationship between food and sleep. Because medieval peasants were accidentally ahead of us here too. You've probably heard modern advice: don't eat too close to bedtime. Avoid heavy meals. No sugar, no caffeine. All great. But Beatrice didn't have to read any of that, because her evening meal was designed for one thing: not dying then sleeping. Dinner was simple, a thin pottage, basically medieval soup, with grains, herbs, and whatever root vegetables hadn't gone soft and philosophical. It was warm, salty, and filling in that heavy, I can't feel my legs but in a good way kind of manner. It didn't spike blood sugar or rev up digestion. It just eased the body into stillness. And yes, it was bland, but so is oatmeal, and that puts half the population straight to sleep. Don't knock it. Also, consider the fact that after dinner, there was nothing to do. No lights, no screens, No content to consume until your brain melts out of your ears. After dinner, the body did what bodies naturally want to do when they're warm and full and wrapped in wool. Slow down. Beatrice wasn't asking herself what show to binge. She was asking herself whether she could make it to the straw mattress before passing out in the soup bowl. That's a different energy entirely. There's another medieval sleep factor that's uncomfortable to admit, but deeply true: life expectancy. Yeah, I said it. People died young. Death was normal. Illness, accident, childbirth, infection, all of it could sweep someone away without warning. And because of that, the medieval mindset around sleep was less about optimizing and more about acceptance. Each night was taken seriously, not with fear, but with gravity. It might be your last, not in a dramatic, angsty way, just in the way rain falls. You knew it could happen. So there was no pressure to sleep like an athlete, or monitor your dreams with a Bluetooth pillow. Instead, there was a kind of reverence, a trust that if the body was given rest, it would carry you forward. And if not, well, you'd go into the next world on a full belly and a warm mattress, hopefully not next to the goat. Let's shift again. Sound. What did they fall asleep to? Because the medieval peasant wasn't lying in engineered silence. They had their own kind of noise machine. The creak of beams, the pop of the hearth, the slow shifting of someone turning over beside you, the wind nudging against the shutters, maybe a dog barking from across the village, maybe owls, maybe wolves. These weren't interruptions. These were part of the lullaby. A reminder that the world was still moving outside, that it wasn't just you and your thoughts in the dark. It was the whole village, sleeping together, breathing in rhythm. We've lost that. We put in earbuds and pretend the world isn't there. They embraced it. Let the sound of chickens fussing in their sleep remind them that life was close, and that close meant safe. And here's something else. They believed in sleep as repair. Not scientifically maybe, but spiritually. They believed that rest wasn't just helpful, it was healing. They thought sleep helped restore balance in the humors. They thought it could soften madness, mend broken spirits, guide the sick back to health. That's why when someone was ill, the first advice was always, let them sleep. Not because it was passive, because it was powerful. So if you're lying there now, hovering in that slow space between thought and dream, know this: you don't have to do anything. You're not failing. You don't need to fix your sleep. You just need to let it carry you. Like Beatrice did, like thousands did, through hunger and cold and grief and laughter. Sleep was never supposed to be perfect. Just real, just earned, just enough. Let's shift into something a little more physical. We've covered the herbs, the food, the fire, the emotional surrender. But now let's talk about what medieval peasants actually did with their bodies right before sleep. Because even though they didn't have bedtime yoga or guided meditations for CEOs, they had their own rituals. And Beatrice, our queen of dirt and dreams, had them too. Her final tasks each day were slow and strangely ceremonial. Not by design, just by habit. She'd bank the fire, carefully arranging ash to keep the coals alive. She'd check the door latch, even though she knew it was held together with 2 nails and a vague prayer. She'd whisper to the dog if there was one, murmur something to the rafters, and then she'd lie down, stretch once, arms over her head, back cracking like old bark, and exhale. It wasn't a routine, it was a rhythm, a way of telling her body, we're done now, you can let go. And the thing is, it worked, because those little actions anchored her to the present moment. Her mind wasn't 3 weeks ahead. She wasn't lying in bed planning next year's harvest, or reliving an awkward exchange at the market. She was present, just her, the warm bed, the cold air brushing her cheek, and the slow quiet that follows a full day. Now, here's something strange but true. Medieval peasants actually had more sleep hours per year than most modern people. I know, it sounds like a joke. But researchers studying historical records found that the natural pacing of peasant life especially with longer winter nights and less artificial stimulation, meant they often slept more total hours than we do now. So even if their mattresses were tragic and their blankets smelled like goat breath, they were well rested in a way we rarely allow ourselves to be. Of course, the sleep quality was mixed. They weren't floating on memory foam, but they made up for it in consistency. Their sleep wasn't a crisis every night. It was just part of life, like eating, like mending socks, like feeding chickens who hate you for reasons they won't explain. They didn't argue with sleep, and that's one of the most powerful things we've forgotten how to do. And here's where it gets heavier. Sometimes sleep was the only time peasants could actually feel safe. Think about that. Their days were filled with work, expectation, noise, and constant motion. But night, that was sacred. You can't be taxed in your dreams. You can't be judged while breathing in the dark. No one's watching. There's no task. There's no measuring stick. There's just you curled up in the middle of a world that finally stopped asking things from you. That's what we're doing here too, creating space. So if you're lying there right now and your thoughts are still twitching, breathe. Let this be your small rebellion. Don't optimize it. Don't analyze it. Just rest. Because medieval peasants weren't trying to sleep well so they could crush the next day. They slept because it was dark, because their backs hurt, because their kids were finally quiet, because the fire was low and the animals were fed, and for one brief moment nothing else was needed. They slept like they meant it. Let's talk about something darker, something most people skip when they romanticize simple medieval living, because for all its peace and natural rhythms, sleep in the Middle Ages came with its shadows too. And I don't just mean emotional ones. I mean actual physical threats in the dark, the kind that made you pray a little harder before bed, not for peace, but for survival. Beatrice, yes, still alive, still thriving in her wool and wood smoke, knows this intimately, because even though she's curled up with her family, her feet warm beneath a patchy wool blanket, she sleeps with awareness, not anxiety, not panic, but something older, animal, almost. A sensitivity to the creaks of the house, the pitch of the wind, the way the dog growls in its sleep. Every sound is measured, not feared, just catalogued. Why? Because peasants didn't have locks, not real ones, not the kind that made them feel safe. A door was just a wooden board with a crossbar, and if someone really wanted in, they were coming in, which meant that sleep wasn't always pure surrender. Sometimes it was half vigil, a willingness to close your eyes with the full knowledge that you might need to open them fast. It wasn't paranoia, it was realism, and it made their sleep even more precious, because every hour they got without interruption felt like a gift. A full night of sleep, that was gold, that was wealth. That was a moment where the world let them be. This is why medieval sleep rituals weren't just physical, they were spiritual. The prayers, the herbs, the slow fire rituals, they weren't just for comfort, they were protection against bad dreams, against wandering spirits, against thieves or sickness, or the creeping cold that slipped in through cracks in the stone and tried to steal breath. So if you've ever thought of sleep as a luxury instead of a right, congratulations. You're closer to Beatrice than you think. But here's the twist. Even with all that fear, all that fragility, they still slept. They still let go. Not because they were naive, but because they knew rest was not optional. You can't plow fields and raise children and survive pestilence and hunger without sleep. You just can't. And so they gave themselves to it. Fully, repeatedly, sometimes with a whispered prayer, sometimes with a silent sigh, always with the kind of courage no one really talks about. Because sleeping in the dark with no guarantee of safety, that's bravery. Every night. That's part of what I want you to feel tonight, that your sleep isn't a weakness. It isn't failure. It's not something to squeeze in around the edges of your life, like it's undeserved. It's a human right, a gift, a soft rebellion against everything that wants you exhausted and compliant. So be like Beatrice. Tuck yourself in without guilt. Sleep like you've earned it, because you have. Every second. Let's go somewhere more vulnerable, because sleep at its core is vulnerability. And medieval peasants understood that better than most. When you lie down in the dark, no weapons, no torch, no walls but straw and maybe a prayer, you're not just resting, you're trusting your family, your shelter, the world outside, yourself. Beatrice didn't call it vulnerability, she just lived it. She laid herself down next to people she loved, and people she tolerated, and hoped the roof held, and the pigs stayed out of the garden, and that tomorrow didn't bring a new decree from the Lord about some new tax on air you accidentally breathed. That happened once. It was a dark time. But in that vulnerability, something else grew, something we've mostly lost. Closeness, not emotional, physical, literal, skin against skin, breath, shared in the cold, arms tucked around backs, heads pressed into chests, feet tangled under coarse blankets, not because it was romantic, but because it was necessary. Warmth wasn't optional. Touch wasn't weird. It was survival. And the weird thing? That created sleep security. You knew without asking that someone else would stir if danger came, that the same cough you heard every night was still there, steady, grounding, that if the baby cried, you weren't the only one who'd wake. It was a net, a human web, a kind of safety modern bedrooms try to imitate with smart thermostats and white noise machines. But here's where it turns, because not every night was safe. Not every sleep ended in morning. Sometimes, someone didn't wake up, and there were no sirens, no ambulances, just the slow realization that something had changed in the shape of the bed, that someone was still, too still. And grief came in the same way sleep did, quiet, full, heavy as wool. And they'd bury them, and they'd weep, and then unbelievably they'd go back to sleep the next night. Same bed, same straw, same ache. Because what else could they do? They knew sleep didn't protect them from death, but it carried them through it, and sometimes that was enough. If that sounds heavy, it's because it is, but there's comfort in that weight. A reminder that you're not the first person to lie awake wondering about things you can't fix. You're not the first to ache and rest in the same breath. That's old, that's ancient, that's normal. Beatrice carried grief to bed with her, tucked it under the blanket like it was another child, let it breathe against her back until it dulled. And you know what? It never went away, but it softened, over time, with firelight, with quiet, with rest. So if you're here now, lying in your own dark, listening to this in the glow of a screen or the hush of a room that finally went still, you're not alone. You're part of something older than noise, older than electricity, older than fear. You're part of the long chain of humans who said, even now, even this, I'll sleep anyway. Let's talk about rhythm. Not the kind you dance to, but the kind that holds you up. Because one of the most powerful sleep hacks medieval peasants used had nothing to do with beds or herbs, or even exhaustion. It had to do with repetition, predictability, the holy art of doing the same thing the same way at the same time, every single day. Beatrice wasn't experimenting with polyphasic sleep schedules. She wasn't adjusting her bedtime because a podcast said 10:42 p.m. is the new optimal REM window. She went to sleep when the sun left, and she woke up when it returned, sometimes with a stretch, sometimes with a groan, but always with certainty. And in a world filled with chaos, weather, and the occasional violent chicken, certainty was rare. Sleep was where she found it. Every evening she wound down the same way. Not with blue light filters or an ASMR playlist, but with tasks. Small anchoring tasks. Fold the cloth. Stir the coals, put the boots by the door, check the baby's feet, blow out the candle. These were more than chores, they were cues. They told her body, it's time, we're safe now, you can go. And it worked, because the brain loves rhythm. It loves knowing what comes next. Even now in your world, that's true. That's why bedtime routines work for children, and why they still work for adults. Even if we pretend they don't, Beatrice had one. She didn't call it that, she just lived it. And the payoff? When she lay down, her body believed her. It didn't argue. It didn't replay awkward conversations from the market or invent imaginary disasters. It recognized the pattern, the signal, and it obeyed. You might think that sounds boring, predictable, maybe even dull, but when you live a life of uncertainty, when the weather might ruin your harvest, and the Lord might raise your taxes, and your neighbor might cough in a suspicious way for too many days in a row, boring is a miracle. Predictable is power. The truth is, medieval peasants didn't crave stimulation at night. They had enough of that during the day. What they wanted was stillness, not silence, not sleep perfection, just the peace of repetition, the comfort of knowing that, at least tonight, this small ritual would go uninterrupted. So what bed's your version of that? Is it brushing your teeth? Folding the same corner of the blanket? Hearing this voice? This exact sentence, night after night? If it is, I hope it sets working. Because this is your fire banking, your wool cap, your cue that the world is allowed to wait, that nothing else is required of you now except rest. And maybe that's the hack we need most. Not a supplement, not a strategy, just a ritual strong enough to hush the noise. Let's stay with Beatrice a little longer, because her world still has more to teach us. Not about surviving the night, we've covered that, but about something softer, something sacred. Let's talk about dreaming. In medieval times, dreams weren't background noise. They weren't dismissed as weird mental static or written off as side effects of eating too much turnip stew before bed. They were respected, interpreted, collected like stories passed down in whispers. Beatrice didn't roll her eyes at dreams. She listened to them. She might even start her morning with, I saw the river in my sleep again, and no one would ask if she needed help. They'd ask what the river looked like this time. Because dreaming, back then, was another kind of seeing, another kind of knowing. It wasn't just personal, it was communal. Whole families might sit over morning porridge and pick apart the night's visions like omens. And sure, sometimes it was nonsense. Sometimes it was just a cow falling into a well wearing a bishop's hat. But sometimes it meant something. And even when it didn't, it still mattered. That's what we've lost. The idea that dreams don't need to be useful to be worth keeping. They don't have to be prophetic. They don't have to lead to a business breakthrough. They can just be strange, slow places your mind visits, when the world goes quiet, and that's enough. Beatrice didn't try to control her dreams. She didn't lucid dream or journal or optimize her REM windows. She just noticed, paid attention, gave them space. Like how she gave space to grief, or weather, or silence. And honestly, there's something in that, a lesson in letting go. Because we, the modern restless, treat sleep like a machine. We expect output, but Beatrice treated it like a mystery, not to be solved, just respected. So maybe tonight, if something strange finds you in sleep, don't shove it away. Let it linger. Let it be a guest. Let it wander through the rooms of your mind like a traveler, bringing gifts you don't understand yet. And if you're not asleep yet, that's okay too. Beatrice had those nights. Nights when the child wouldn't settle, when the wind sounded like voices, when the air felt thick with something unnamed. On those nights, she didn't fight it. She waited. Let her body settle slowly, like coals cooling under ash. Because rest still counts. Even when it's quiet. Even when it's incomplete. Even when it feels like waiting more than surrender. So wherever you are now, Eyes open, closed, somewhere in between, this moment still belongs to you. This soft dark, this gentle hush, this invitation to dream without pressure. And when you do drift off, let it be like she did, without apology, without effort, just sleep, raw and unpolished. Just a dream, waiting to show itself. Let's shift the lantern just a little and talk about something that never makes it into bedtime. Advice columns, weather. Not in the forecast sense. In the bone deep, you feel it even in your eyelashes kind of way. Because if there was one thing medieval peasants had to sleep through, it was the entire wrath of the climate. No insulation, no radiators, no apps warning them about feels like minus death. Just cold wind and an unspoken agreement with the sky. Please don't kill me tonight. And yet, Beatrice did sleep. She slept through snow that came in sideways, rain that found every crack in the thatch, wind that pushed through the cottage like a ghost looking for someone to blame. And you know how she managed it? Layers. Not just of fabric, but of adaptation. First layer, clothing. She didn't change into pajamas. That's cute. She just didn't take her clothes off. Day wear was sleepwear, especially in winter. Maybe she'd loosen a belt. Maybe a sock came off somewhere around midnight. But she slept bundled in the same wool and linen she worked in, because the goal wasn't elegance, it was survival. Second layer, fire, or the embers of one. The fire was the beating heart of the cottage, and every evening it was banked carefully under ash to last through the night. Not for light, there wasn't much to see at midnight anyway, just for warmth, just to keep frost from claiming the inside walls. Third layer, bodies. No shame, no awkwardness, just body heat shared because the alternative was frostbite. Kids curled into parents. Adults spooned like mismatched spoons, the occasional pig in the corner steaming gently under its own personal cloud of warmth. If a dog joined the pile, even better. No one said no. They welcomed it, because warmth was holy. Fourth layer, mental resilience. You learn to sleep through drafts when there's no alternative. You learn to ignore the creak, the drip, the scrape of bare branches like claws against stone. You learn to tell your body, this is safe enough, and that's the only lullaby you need. And that's what we forget. That sleep doesn't require perfection. It requires enough, not ideal temperature. Not a perfectly quiet room with a white noise machine imported from Scandinavia. Just enough. Beatrice didn't wake up every morning refreshed and glowing. Sometimes she woke up stiff, sometimes cold, sometimes curled like a comma, and hoping her back would unbend before sunrise. But she slept, because her body trusted the process, trusted that some nights would be better than others, trusted that sleep was not a performance, but a practice. So if your sleep isn't perfect tonight, good. Welcome to the club. You're in great company. Because Beatrice would tell you just being able to lie down and try again tomorrow is enough. There's no medal for flawless rest. Just the warmth of trying, the weight of your own breath, the quiet permission to be human. Let's talk about space, or more specifically, the complete lack of it. Because when we imagine medieval peasant sleep, we picture rustic charm, stone walls, maybe a cozy fire, some heirloom quality hay. But the truth is, Beatrice didn't have a sleep sanctuary. She had a room. One room for living, eating, arguing, boiling turnips, storing kindling, praying to saints, and sleeping beside a child who might kick her in the neck halfway through the night. And guess what? She still managed to fall asleep. Because for medieval peasants, sleep didn't require boundaries. It didn't need scented candles or a separate wing of the house or 10 feet of personal radius. It just needed a spot, a patch of ground, a wool blanket, and enough exhaustion to not care that someone else's toes were probably touching your spine. You want a sleep hack? Here's one. Lower the bar, way down. Medieval peasants didn't expect peace and quiet. They didn't expect privacy. They didn't expect a perfect mattress, or the ideal room temperature, or even a pillow. that didn't feel like a sack of betrayal. They expected company and drafty walls, and that if they were lucky, no one would throw up in the corner during the night. That was it. That was luxury. And somehow that expectation made sleep easier. Because when your standards are survival and shared warmth, your brain stops nitpicking. It doesn't lie awake, wondering why the neighbor's dog won't stop barking, or why your foot's a little too cold. It just checks out. It says, you made it through another day. You're horizontal. We're calling that a win. And here's the really human part. Sometimes Beatrice got up in the middle of the night, not for segmented sleep, not because it was part of a routine, but because her body said, you need a moment. Maybe the child was stirring. Maybe the wind knocked something off the shelf. Maybe she just needed to pee in a bowl and didn't want to trip over the goat. But she got up, moved around, adjusted, and went back to sleep. No guilt, no failure, no internal monologue saying, great, now the night sep's ruined. Just sleep, interrupted, then resumed, like breath. So if you're lying there, still not out, still caught in the middle, remember Beatrice had those nights too. Nights where rest came in pieces, where dreams wandered in late, where sleep was messy and imperfect and absolutely good enough. That's the hack. No one talks about letting sleep be human. Still with me? Let's talk about what happened right before sleep. Not the winding down or the chores or the fire banking. I mean the last words spoken, because for a medieval peasant like Beatrice, those final words before surrendering to darkness held weight. They weren't filler. They weren't muttered half complaints about how long the day was. They were small rituals, soft things, a whispered prayer, a thank you, a joke, maybe even silence, held together like a secret. Because the last thing you say before sleep, that sticks. For Beatrice, it might have been something as simple as, we'll see what tomorrow brings. Not dramatic, not poetic, just true, because medieval life didn't come with guarantees. You didn't know what tomorrow held. You didn't even know if it would come. So you said something small, something humble, something enough. And maybe that's something we should bring back, not just the sleep tricks, but the tone of how we close the day. We don't need to lie in bed doom scrolling until the phone falls on our face. We don't need to review every mistake from middle school or mentally draft 7 imaginary conversations. We could just say, good night, I'm here, I'm breathing. That's enough. That might be the best sleep aid available, and it doesn't cost anything. Now, one more angle we haven't touched, time. Not the time of day, but the life stage time. Because medieval peasants didn't sleep the same way all the time. Beatrice at 18 slept differently than Beatrice at 38. Sleep changed. Patterns shifted. The weight of the blanket might have stayed the same, but the weight of the world didn't. When she was young, sleep came fast, easy. Her body was tired from climbing trees and chasing geese and running from responsibilities. Sleep was the obvious next step. But as she got older, children, stress, grief, it took more coaxing. Not more effort, just more care. And still, she slept. She adapted, learned to accept that sleep wasn't always the same each year, or each season, that there were chapters. Winters where sleep was a deep, slow cave. Summers where it was lighter, shorter, more interrupted by heat and thoughts. There were years she shared a bed, years she didn't, years she slept beside silence, years she slept beside sorrow. And it all still counted. So if you're listening now, lying in your own version of Beatrice's world, wondering why sleep isn't how it used to be, maybe it's not broken. Maybe it's just different. Maybe your sleep has grown with you, shifted to match your shape. Maybe that's not a flaw, but a sign you're human. Let it be what it is tonight. No fixing, no forcing, just breathing, just being. Let's pull back the curtain on something else. Medieval peasants mastered without realizing it, accepting the night as it is, not trying to dominate it, not trying to outthink it, just letting it settle over everything like a second skin. For Beatrice, nightfall wasn't a transition. It was a truth, one that didn't ask for input. The sun left, and that was it. No bargaining, no artificial extensions, no squeezing in one more chore under the glow of a kitchen light. Just dark. And whatever you did inside it. In that sense, medieval peasants were closer to the earth than we are. Not metaphorically, but literally. Their days ended when light left. Their energy followed the sky. They didn't treat the night like a delay in productivity. They treated it like a pause, a breath, a soft reset. And the more you think about it, the more that makes sense. Because darkness isn't the enemy of sleep. It's the invitation. Beatrice didn't fear it. She didn't have blackout curtains. She had a window stuffed with straw and cloth and a fire that dimmed whether she asked it to or not. No light meant no performance, just presence. And you know what else she didn't do? She didn't try to fill the night. Not with stimulation, not with entertainment, not with mental to-do lists she'd already written in dirt with a stick earlier that day. She let the quiet be quiet. And that's something most of us can barely tolerate. We want background noise, a podcast, a fan, a hum. But Beatrice, she had silence so thick you could hear your own bones shift. And somehow that became comfort. Not every night, of course. Some nights, silence made the grief louder, the worries sharper. That never changes. But the absence of noise wasn't seen as empty. It was seen as full. The kind of full that carries sleep with it like a tide. So if you're lying there right now in silence or something close to it, know that this space you're in, this hush, this room where nothing is being asked of you, that's your invitation. And no, it won't be perfect. You might still toss, still wake, still shift 10 times before your body figures out what position doesn't make your hips scream. But you're not doing it wrong. You're doing it the way it's always been done. Beatrice would have turned over, pulled the blanket up, listened to the coals settle, and let the dark do what it does best, hold her. So let it hold you too. Let's talk about one more piece of this sleepy puzzle, the one no one markets, no one monetizes, no one puts on a sleep tracking dashboard. I'm talking about the feeling of being needed, of mattering. Because for all the exhaustion, the hardship, the blistered hands and cracked heels, Beatrice went to sleep every night, knowing that her presence in the world actually meant something. Someone needed her. The kids, the garden, the goat, even the house, sagging and crooked and full of soot. If she didn't tend the fire, no one else would. That kind of grounding, it's not loud, but it's stabilizing. And it lets you rest in a way no app ever could. We talk a lot now about isolation, about sleepless nights spent staring at ceilings, wondering what the point of it all is. Medieval peasants had their share of that too. But they also had a brutal, beautiful kind of certainty. If they didn't show up tomorrow, things would unravel. Not the world, but their world. The corner of it they kept stitched together with work and care and repeatable acts of love. Beatrice didn't lie in bed wondering if she mattered. She didn't have time. She knew. Because sleep wasn't a detachment from life. It was part of the cycle that let her keep showing up. And even if she never saw her name in a book, or a tapestry or any record outside her village's muddy trail, her absence would be felt. Her warmth, her laugh, her hand steadying a child's head or a boiling pot or a friend breaking under bad news. That's not to say she slept easy every night. She didn't. Some nights she cried. Some nights she stared at the rafters and wished for more, or less, or something she didn't have the words for. But she still slept because she knew the next day needed her. And that knowing, it wrapped around her like a second blanket. So, here's the strange little truth, hidden inside centuries of hay and hard bread and sleepless goats. Rest becomes easier when you know you're part of something. When your life, even in its smallest form, sends out ripples that touch other lives. Maybe you forget that sometimes. Maybe no one tells you enough. So let me do it now. You matter. You've mattered all day. And even in sleep you matter. You're not vanishing. You're just refilling. So tomorrow you can show up again, cracked and imperfect, and still needed. That's not sentimental. That's practical. That's medieval. We've talked about straw beds, freezing nights, strange dreams, goats with boundary issues. But there's another medieval sleep trick that's been hiding in plain sight. One that you and I rarely get to use, because modern life's too noisy for it. You ready for this? They didn't multitask their minds. Beatrice didn't go to bed thinking about 10 things at once. She didn't replay every conversation, rehearse tomorrow's worries, and spiral through an imaginary argument she might have next week. She had one thought, one concern, one goal, because that's all her brain had room for. And that wasn't a failure of imagination. That was clarity. Sleep wasn't squeezed into the margins of her life. It was the margin, a clean edge, where thinking stopped and being took over. You've probably felt it before, those rare nights when your mind just releases, when the thoughts go quiet, not because you force them to, but because something in you knows now is not the time. Beatrice lived in that space more often than not because she was enlightened, but because the world wasn't constantly yelling at her from a glowing screen. She knew what it meant to rest her mind. Not with meditation apps, just with silence, with rhythm, with the predictable hum of her small life unfolding one steady moment at a time. And if her thoughts did get noisy, she didn't judge it. She didn't diagnose herself. She just laid there in the dark, listened to the fire crackle down to its bones, and waited for her body to catch up. That's the hack. No pressure to sleep. Just permission. That's what most of us are missing. We've made sleep a performance. We track it, grade it, feel bad about it. But Beatrice? She didn't care if she woke up once, twice, 5 times. She didn't care if the sleep was shallow or deep. If she woke up tired, she blamed the rooster and moved on. No shame, no stats, just another sunrise to meet. So if you're lying there now, thinking you're doing sleep wrong because your thoughts are still pacing behind your eyes, breathe. You're not broken, you're just alive. And eventually, like Beatrice, your mind will get bored of itself and wander into sleep without you even noticing. Let it. Let's sit with something a little more uncomfortable. Because medieval sleep wasn't always calm. Sometimes Beatrice didn't want to sleep. Not because she couldn't, because she didn't feel like she deserved to. Maybe she'd had a fight with her husband over something stupid. Maybe she yelled at the youngest when he knocked over the pot again. Maybe she spent the entire day snapping at people and couldn't find the grace to apologize. And now, lying in bed, she was left with the one judge no peasant could avoid: her own mind. But here's what she didn't do. She didn't stew. She didn't spiral into shame. She didn't get up and pace or reach for a phone to numb the guilt away. She just lay there. Let the weight of the blanket press her back into her body. Let the silence ask her questions. And eventually, she forgave herself. Enough to sleep. Because in the peasant's world, the day ends whether you're ready or not. There's no overtime for overthinking. No bonus hour to untangle everything. When the light leaves, it leaves. And you either follow it into the dark or you let it go without you. That kind of emotional surrender is something we've forgotten. We think sleep has to wait until everything's resolved, that we need closure or peace or a perfect mood. But Beatrice knew better. She knew that sleep could come to the guilty, the sad, the confused. That rest isn't a reward for having it all figured out. It's the space that lets you try again. She may not have had therapy, but she had the sky, the fire, a rhythm, a soft voice, maybe her own, maybe her mother's telling her that tomorrow would arrive, no matter how today ended. And that's a lesson modern life buries beneath 1,000 productivity lectures, that you don't have to earn sleep with success, or happiness, or closure. You just have to make it to the bed. There were nights Beatrice wept into the straw, and still she slept. Eventually, with swollen eyes and a sore heart. Because the body always wants to rest, even when the soul is noisy. And here's the quiet truth. Some of your best sleep won't come on your best days. It'll come on the days where you feel like a wreck, when you think you didn't do enough, when the voice in your head won't shut up and the weight on your chest feels like it's trying to become part of your ribs. That's when your body needs sleep the most. Not as an escape, as a reset. You don't need to wait until you're calm to sleep. You just need to trust that sleep will help you find calm on the other side. That's what Beatrice believed. Not because she read it, because she lived it, over and over, until it became part of her bones. So if you're lying there now, feeling like your head is too loud and your heart's a little crooked, this is still your night. This is still your rest. You don't need to fix yourself before you enter the dark. Just close your eyes, like she did. Not with confidence, with courage. We've talked a lot about sleep in the physical sense. The rituals, the exhaustion, the scratchy wool, the occasional passive-aggressive livestock. But now let's turn to something softer, something slower. Let's talk about the way medieval peasants like Beatrice learned to wait. Because more than anything, sleep in that world was tied to patience, and not the performative kind. The real, raw, hard kind. The kind of patience that doesn't come from mindfulness apps. It comes from having no other choice. Beatrice didn't expect instant rest. If sleep didn't come right away, she didn't panic. She didn't count the hours left before dawn. She didn't do mental math about how wrecked she'd be tomorrow. She just waited, one breath at a time. Because sleep in her world wasn't a race, it was a rhythm, and rhythms take time. That's one of the biggest differences between now and then. Today we expect to fall asleep the moment we lie down, as if the bed is a button and our brains are supposed to obey. But Beatrice knew better. She knew sleep was a guest. Sometimes early, sometimes late, sometimes rude, but always eventually arriving. And that trust made the waiting easier. She would lie still, listening to the fire settle, the baby snore, the wind crawl through the thatch. And she'd let time do what it does best. Carry her. No resistance, no judgment, just time moving through her. And yes, there were nights she got restless. Nights when her thoughts picked at her like burrs in wool. But even then, she didn't treat it like failure. She just turned over, adjusted the blanket, and tried again. That's the real secret, repeating the invitation without demanding a response. If she was lucky, she'd wake in the middle of the night, what they called the first sleep, and feel that rich, dark pause, the space between. Not a mistake, not insomnia, just a natural break in the body's rhythm. She might rise, stoke the fire, say a quiet prayer, check the child, or she might just lie there, half awake, watching the shadows breathe, waiting for sleep to return without summoning it. And it always did. Because she wasn't trying to win at rest. She was trying to live through it. That's something we unlearned. We get frustrated. We search for fixes. But maybe the answer isn't doing more. Maybe it's doing less. Maybe it's whispering to yourself in the dark. We twos sleep yet. But you can rest. Beatrice didn't need a guide. She just needed time. Time to let her body untangle. Time to let her breath deepen. Time to let her mind run out of thoughts and curl in on itself like an ember at the end of a flame. So if you're lying there, eyes still open, thoughts still swimming, remember, sleep isn't a switch. It's a tide. It pulls you in when it's ready. All you have to do is stop fighting the current. You're already floating. Let's go further. Not into sleep itself, but into what sleep meant for people like Beatrice. Because, for all the firelight comfort and bedtime rituals, the truth is, medieval peasants didn't treat sleep as a luxury. They treated it as a return. Every night, without ceremony, they came back to themselves, back to their bodies, back to the quiet, back to the parts of the day that didn't require performance or planning or pretending. See, during the day, Beatrice belonged to the world. She belonged to tasks, to others, to the demands of soil and structure and season, but at night, she belonged to nothing but the dark. No one asked anything of her. No one expected anything wise or productive or clever. She could just lie there, breathe, exist. And maybe that's what made medieval sleep so deeply restorative, even when the beds were terrible and the cold seeped through every crack. It wasn't the physical setup, it was the absence of obligation. Nobody was tracking her steps. No one needed her to monetize her hobbies. No one was sending messages at midnight with quick questions. When the sun went down, the world let her go, not out of kindness, just rhythm. And rhythm, as it turns out, is a better gift than kindness most nights. So she learned to meet the dark like an old friend, not with fear, not even with excitement, just with familiarity, the kind of knowing that comes from repetition, from experience, from showing up again and again and discovering that, yes, sleep will hold you even when nothing else does. And here's something else we don't think about in that stillness. Beatrice also did some of her best thinking. Not the frantic kind, the slow kind, thoughts that rose uninvited and wandered softly through her, trailing memories behind them like mist. Not solving, just witnessing. That's what the night gave her. Time to be with herself, without interruption, without judgment. Some of those thoughts were kind, some weren't, but all of them were hers. And when the fire finally dimmed low enough, when her limbs got heavy, when the outside sounds faded into something more distant than real, she'd follow her thoughts down into sleep like a trail disappearing into fog. That was the real hack. Accepting sleep as a homecoming. Not an achievement, not a cure, just a return to herself. Every single night. So if you're still awake now, and your thoughts are beginning to drift without direction, good. You're doing exactly what she did. Let them move. Let them unwind you. There's nowhere else to be. You've come back to yourself. And that SEP's more than enough. Let's linger in something simple. Not dramatic, not profound, just quietly, stubbornly human. The medieval sleep hack no one writes about because it doesn't look like a hack at all. Ready? Consistency. That sips it. That sips the trick. Beatrice went to bed at the same time every night. Not because she read it in a health scroll, not because she was optimizing her recovery phase, but because the sun left and the work was done and the house grew quiet. Her life, like every life around her, moved with the light, not against it, not around it, with it. She didn't debate whether she should stay up a little longer. She didn't binge her way past exhaustion. She didn't decide at 11 p.m. to reorganize her pantry or emotionally spiral through 900 years of self-analysis. The night came. She met it. Same hour. Every day. And it wasn't rigid. It wasn't forced. It was just normal. Modern sleep hygiene advice makes this sound revolutionary. Go to bed at the same time. Sure. But what they forget is you have to want the rhythm. Beatrice didn't follow a schedule. She was part of it. There's a difference. And that consistency, it trained her body. Sleep wasn't something she chased. It found her because her nervous system wasn't on a roller coaster. It was on a loop, a simple one, predictable, safe. Even on bad nights, even when the stew burned or the baby wouldn't settle, or the neighbor's cow escaped again, and rampaged through 3 vegetable plots, she still followed the rhythm. She didn't give up on the pattern just because the day had teeth. She trusted that the pattern would hold. And that's what consistency really is. Not discipline, trust. She trusted that sleep would come because it always had, and because she gave it space to do so. It wasn't about how tired she was. Some nights she was wide awake, staring at the ceiling, worrying about winter, or wondering what that pain in her side meant. But she still lay down, still pulled the blanket over her, still faced the same direction, still closed her eyes, still let the pattern do its work. No judgment, no pressure, just a familiar path, walked in the dark. That's the peace we've lost. We want results immediately. We panic when one night doesn't go right. But Beatrice had faith in repetition, that if she showed up for the ritual, sleep would meet her there. Eventually, maybe not the first hour, but it would come, and it always did. So if your body doesn't feel ready right now, that's fine. Just keep the rhythm. Lie down. Be still. Let the night know you're waiting. Let your body remember the path. Because sleep isn't something you win. It's something you return to. Let's talk about something strange. Peace through repetition. Because modern life teaches us that routine is boring. Predictability is lazy. But to a medieval peasant like Beatrice, predictability was freedom, not flashy freedom. Quiet freedom. The kind that comes from knowing what the next moment holds, and knowing it doesn't hold too much. Her days were hard, sure, but they were structured. Every morning looked a lot like the one before it. Fire, water, water, work, repeat. And her nights? Just as steady. Same fire banking, same bed, same breath. No surprises, no plot twists. Just the deeply comforting rhythm of life, refusing to rush her. That's something we've forgotten how to love. We're addicted to novelty, stimulation, constant change. But our nervous systems, they're still medieval, still built to respond to safety, through sameness, still soothed by what they can predict. That's why Beatrice could fall asleep so easily. Not because her life was easy, but because her mind wasn't whiplashed by chaos. She knew what came next. She knew how it felt. She could trust it. And trust is the real sleep aid no one sells. Because when you trust the day is done, and trust your body knows what to do next, and trust that the darkness doesn't need fixing, you don't fight sleep. You let it happen. Beatrice didn't feel guilty for being tired. She didn't call herself lazy. She didn't believe rest had to be earned by suffering. She rested because she was human, because the world asked everything of her during the day, and because she refused to let it take her nights too. And maybe that's a lesson we all need. That repetition isn't a trap, it's a refuge. A soft groove your body can slide into without hesitation. Sleep gets easier when it knows where to land. So, if you've been chasing variety, stimulation, newness, and finding yourself more tired than ever, maybe it's time to try something older, slower. Something like Beatrice's bedtime, predictable, imperfect, unshiny, deeply human. No new routine, no major fix, just again, the same corner of the bed, the same breath, the same breath, the same night. Welcoming you back like an old friend who never stopped waiting. Because there's nothing boring about being safe enough to stop performing. Still here? Let's return to the fire. Because in the medieval world, the fire was everything. Not just heat. Not just light. It was rhythm. It was memory. It was the center of sleep. For Beatrice, the fire was a pulse in the corner of the room, beating low and steady long after everyone else had quieted down. It was the last thing she looked at before her eyes closed, the last sound she heard before the wind took over. You could hear it whisper, not loudly, just the soft crackle of wood breaking down, surrendering to something older than itself. That sound became part of the night. It told the body, you're not alone, you're not cold, you're not working anymore, you're just here. Modern bedrooms have thermostats, silent and sterile. Medieval cottages had living warmth, inconsistent but loyal, and that inconsistency made it feel real. Beatrice didn't demand perfect comfort, she just needed the fire not to go out. That was enough. And when it did start to die, when the glow shrank to a dull orange blink, she didn't panic. She'd stir, pull the blanket tighter, adjust. That's it. No crisis. Just another page in the book of night. It's funny how something as small as a fire can become a sleep ritual. But that's how peasants lived. Every small thing mattered. Every repeatable act was holy. The way she folded her hands under the blanket. The way she exhaled once, slowly after the candle was snuffed. The way she knew, deep in her chest, that the dark had accepted her for one more night. Because when you sleep close to the fire, you sleep close to yourself. There's no distraction, no background noise to numb the unease, just you and the warmth you've made. And the people beside you breathing slow and soft. The fire didn't just keep the cold out, it kept the world small, manageable, human-sized. So if you're lying there tonight and the room's too quiet, or the shadows feel too big, or the thoughts won't leave you alone, remember the fire. Remember Beatrice, curled on her straw bed, listening to the woods sigh and the wind wait outside. Remember that the dark is ancient, but so is your ability to survive it. And you don't need to be perfect to rest. You just need to let yourself lie still beside the heat you made. That sep's enough. Let's talk about fear. Not the storybook kind. Not dragons and curses. The real kind. The kind Beatrice knew well. Because for medieval peasants, sleep wasn't always wrapped in peace. Sometimes sleep was an act of faith. Faith that the house would hold. That the sickness would pass. That the wolves wouldn't come down from the hills again. Beatrice didn't always fall asleep gently. Sometimes she lay stiff, heart ticking like a drum, ears tuned to the silence for something that wasn't there, or was, or might be. But here's the thing, she still slept. Eventually, not because she defeated fear, but because she learned to rest with it, right beside it. Like an old dog you don't trust entirely, but you've named anyway. We've painted the Middle Ages like they were numb to dread. But that's not true. They just had no choice but to coexist with it. Beatrice feared plague, famine, storms, raids. She feared losing her child in the night and waking to silence that should have been breathing. She feared fires that started from nothing, fever that took someone by morning. She didn't have control, but she had a routine. A blanket, a ritual, and a whisper she said to herself. When the dark pressed too hard, sleep anyway. It wasn't bravery, it was survival. The understanding that not sleeping wouldn't protect her from anything, but sleeping, even badly, might give her enough to face whatever came next. That's a sleep hack no one writes down. The skill of surrendering even when you don't feel safe. The quiet practice of resting not because everything is okay, but because you have to go on anyway, and you can't do that without sleep. Modern life pretends fear is a glitch, something to eliminate, but medieval life knew better. Fear is a companion, and the goal isn't to outrun it. The goal is to close your eyes next to it. Let your breath be louder than your thoughts. Let your body be heavier than your worry. Beatrice didn't have mantras or mindfulness. She had fatigue, trust in patterns, and a strange peace in knowing the world never stopped being dangerous, and still people slept, every night, across generations, under worse conditions, in worse weather, with worse odds. So if you're lying there, your chest tight, your brain rehearsing every possible failure, every worst-case outcome, here's your reminder. You don't need to defeat the fear to sleep. You just need to lie beside it without feeding it. Let it sit in the room. It's old. It's tired too. It'll quiet down if you stop trying to impress it. And eventually, like Beatrice, you'll drift off anyway. Not because the danger passed, but because you did the only thing strong people do in the dark. You rested. Let's talk about silence. Not the sterile, soundproof kind you find in a luxury hotel suite, but the old kind. The real kind, the silence Beatrice fell asleep to. The kind of silence that still has a pulse, that breathes, that holds. Because the medieval night wasn't quiet in the way we think of it. It was alive. It had layers. The low hiss of the fire settling down. The creak of rafters cooling in the night air. The shifting of bodies under wool. the occasional snore that sounded like someone lost a fight in their dreams. And Beatrice didn't fear that silence. She knew it. She needed it. That kind of quiet wasn't empty. It was full, full of space to let your mind drift, full of room for breath, full of permission to stop speaking, stop listening, stop solving. In a world where her days were loud with labor, children yelling, livestock complaining, neighbors arguing over cabbage, silence was sacred. We've replaced that silence with hums and buzzes and constant chatter. Always something in our ears. Music, podcasts, screens, notifications. So much so that when we finally turn everything off, we panic. We don't know what to do with the stillness. It feels too big, too sharp, too honest. But Beatrice didn't have that problem. Her mind slowed naturally with the dark. The silence didn't expose her, it contained her. It wrapped around her like a second blanket. One made not of wool but of absence. The absence of demand. The absence of noise. And in that absence, something beautiful happened. She began to disappear. Not in a scary way, in a restful way. Her thoughts faded. Her body grew heavier. Her sense of time slipped off like a coat. And in the quiet, without trying, without pushing, without effort, she was gone, not lost. Just somewhere else. Somewhere warm and weightless and far from the noise of daylight. You've felt that before. Those first few seconds where the edges blur and you're no longer a person in a room. You're just floating in the space. Silence makes for you. And maybe, just maybe, that's what we're all looking for. Not a better mattress. Not a stronger sleep supplement. Just a place to vanish into. A soft, soundless surrender. So tonight, if you find yourself lying in the dark and everything's finally still, don't fill it. Don't fight it. Let the silence keep you. Let it do the talking. Let it pull you under. Slow and sure, like Beatrice sinking into straw and shadow. You don't need to listen for anything else. It's already here. Let's talk about something that doesn't show up in modern sleep routines. Not in tech blogs, not in doctor's notes, not even in sleep podcasts spoken in the soft tones of a man who sounds like he's trapped inside a scented candle. I'm talking about acceptance. The unglamorous, unimpressive, slow-beating core of medieval sleep. Beatrice didn't go to bed trying to change anything. She didn't lie awake rethinking her diet or productivity. She wasn't looping on how she could have answered the bartering lady with a snappier comeback. She simply let the day be done. No edits, no rewrites, just done. Her world didn't allow endless revision. What was said was said. What was missed was missed. The turnips were either watered or they weren't. There was no back button. And so she learned the kind of deep acceptance that most of us only flirt with. Not because she was better, but because her world demanded it. And here's what that kind of acceptance does to the body. It unlocks sleep like a key in a heavy, stubborn lock. Not instantly, not dramatically, but slowly, like wood swelling in the warmth. Like the mind unclenching its jaw. Beatrice didn't analyze her thoughts. She didn't journal before bed unless you count whispering her regrets to the ceiling in the same tone she used to ask if the goat had died. She didn't chase peace. She just assumed it would find her eventually, or it wouldn't. Either way, she'd sleep. Because she accepted that some things would remain unsolved. Some worries would sleep beside her like a loyal, annoying pet. And instead of fighting that, she just made room. And when you make room, sleep walks right in. Not quickly, not loudly, but it arrives. That's something no sleep tracker will teach you. That the opposite of insomnia isn't control, it's permission to let go. Even when you don't feel resolved, permission to rest inside an unfinished story, to lie still in a bed that isn't perfect, with thoughts that aren't tidy, and say, this is enough. Beatrice did that every night, not because she was wise, because she was tired. And because the world didn't give her the option to chase perfection, only the choice to keep showing up anyway. So tonight, let that be your choice too. Not perfection, not control, just presence, just softness, just the quiet act of lying here, in your body, letting the night do what it's always done, carry you, without needing to be convinced. Let's stay in that space between tired and gone, the drifting place. Because for Beatrice, that edge of sleep wasn't just a pause, it was a crossing, a threshold she stepped through every night, barefoot and bruised with nothing but trust to guide her. There was no fanfare, no finish line, just the slow unraveling of wakefulness. And then the drop. Modern people hate that drop. We try to skip it. We want sleep to be instant, obedient. We want to lie down and vanish, like flipping a switch on a smart bulb. But Beatrice knew the drop is the whole point. It's the falling, not the landing, that softens the world. It's the way your arms feel heavier than they should. The way your thoughts start making nonsense connections. The way your name begins to feel like something borrowed. That's not malfunction. That's arrival. We fight that arrival now. Distract ourselves. Delay it. Drown it out with noise, blue light, urgency. Beatrice didn't. She welcomed it. Or if she didn't, she at least didn't interrupt it. She knew that crossing took time, and that the quiet it brought wasn't a weakness. It was a message. A message that said, "You're allowed to go now. You've done enough. You are enough." That kind of softness only comes when you stop trying to sleep and start surrendering to it. So tonight, as your thoughts start to dissolve at the edges, don't panic. Don't grab at them. Let them melt. Let the fire inside your mind dim without being snuffed. Let your breath thicken, deepen, slow. Let the day end without ceremony. Beatrice never made a moment of it. She just curled to one side, shifted once, settled, let her body lower itself like a stone into a warm river. There were no declarations. No, now I'm going to sleep. Just the slow permission of stillness. And when she crossed over, she didn't even notice. That's the beauty of real sleep. You're never there for the exact moment it arrives. You're only there until it takes over. You don't need to force that. You just need to stop standing in its way. So let yourself fall, not into darkness, but into softness, into the thing your body has always known how to do, into the lullaby older than language. You're already halfway there. Let's talk about how endings worked in Beatrice's world, because sleep wasn't the only thing they did slowly. Everything ended with patience, with presence, with a kind of grace that's all but extinct now. The workday didn't end with a calendar ping or a social scroll. It ended with light fading from the edge of the floorboards, with fire taking over where the sun left off. The meals didn't end with a delivery notification or clattering dishes dumped in a sink. They ended when everyone was full, or when the food was gone, or both. No rush, just rhythm. That's the energy sleep came from. Not chaos, not collapse, but completion. Beatrice didn't crash. She lowered, drifted, unraveled. The same way a field lets itself go quiet after the harvest. The same way a candle finishes without fanfare. You don't need fireworks for an ending. Just stillness. That's what made her sleep so deep. Not the amount, but the arrival. She didn't come to bed, still vibrating with unfinished conversations, half-read emails, and digital leftovers. She brought the day to a close, slowly, softly, with small, repeatable steps. And now, centuries later, we try to skip those steps. We expect our brains to go from 100 tabs to 0 in 60 seconds. And when it doesn't work, we panic. But Beatrice knew the secret. You don't shut the day off, you let it run out. And here's the good news. It's not too late. You can still end things slowly, even now, even here. So take one last breath for the things you didn't finish, the tasks you dropped, the words you didn't say. Let them sit quietly by the door. You'll see them tomorrow or you won't. Either way, they don't belong in your bed. Take one more breath for your body. Not as punishment, not as a checklist, just as recognition. You made it through another day inside this strange, loyal skin of yours. Let that mean something. And then take one final breath with no label. Not for your thoughts, not for your goals, just a breath, with no purpose other than being taken. That's what Beatrice did. Not out of wisdom, just habit. A rhythm so old it didn't need a name. So let that be enough. No dramatic ending, just the quiet fact that you're still here, still listening, still being, still breathing in the dark. Let's talk about time. Not the kind on a clock, but the kind that drips softly, unnoticed. The way sleep used to arrive before we started measuring it. In Beatrice's world, time didn't tick. It flowed. There was no sharp division between hours. No countdown to sunrise. No pressure to sleep fast enough to be useful. There was only the shape of the dark, and what you made of it. She didn't check how long it took her to fall asleep. She didn't count her hours. She didn't try to optimize anything. She just lay there, in a body that had done enough, on a bed that wasn't perfect, in a night that had no agenda, and she let time happen to her. We've forgotten how to do that. We treat time like an enemy, something to manage, control, bend to our will. But Beatrice understood something we don't. You don't own time. You live inside it and sleep. Sleep is when you stop trying to escape that truth. Sleep is when time holds you instead. That's why she didn't panic if she woke up in the middle of the night. She didn't grab at the dark like it was escaping. She didn't scroll. She didn't even move, unless the fire needed tending. She just lay there, let the moment pass, trusted that time would carry her back. Because sleep isn't just about unconsciousness. It's about belonging to the night, belonging to the rhythm, belonging to a life where rest isn't stolen, it's given. Beatrice didn't steal time for sleep. She received it. And maybe that's the most ancient hack of all, to stop trying to force sleep and start trusting the moment to be enough. Even if it's not quiet, even if it's not perfect, even if you're still awake right now, because this is part of it too. The stillness, the breathing, the voice, the waiting. You're not wasting time by resting without sleeping. You're soaking in it, letting the night wrap around you until it's ready to pull you under. That sips the rhythm. That tips the ritual. That sets the return. Let's begin closing the circle, not with a dramatic flourish, just the way Beatrice would have done it. Slowly, without spectacle, because for her, endings weren't grand. They were earned through repetition, softness, and the simple act of showing up again and again for the life she built. And sleep? It was the ultimate quiet ending, a closing line whispered every night. Half finished. There was no applause, no final thought, just that deep, ancient sigh the body makes when it's finally allowed to stop. That seps what we stir reaching now. In her world, Beatrice didn't count wins or losses before bed. She didn't review her productivity. She didn't feel guilty for things left undone. There was no spreadsheet, no calendar, no imaginary judge tallying her value. There was only this truth: she made it through the day. That was enough. So she went to bed the same way she did everything else, with presence, with breath, with the weight of the day finally letting go of her shoulders. And now you're here, doing the same. Maybe your day didn't feel like much. Maybe it felt like too much. But either way, you're here, lying still, breathing slower, letting the noise fall off the edge of your thoughts like water slipping off stone. That sip's not failure. That sip's the beginning of rest. Beatrice never knew a night where everything was perfect. The fire might have smoked. The roof might have leaked. Someone always snored. The goat was probably plotting something. But sleep didn't require perfection, only willingness. And that's what you've given tonight. You showed up. You let yourself be held by the dark instead of fighting it. You trusted the words long enough for the quiet to find you. That's the truest thing we ever do. Letting ourselves lie down in an unfinished world, with unfinished thoughts and say this is still enough to rest inside. So maybe you're already drifting. Maybe you're not. It doesn't matter. You're exactly where you need to be. This is where it ends. Not with a bang, not even with a whisper, just with the soft knowledge that you're allowed to stop now. You've heard everything there is to hear. Beatrice is asleep. The fire's burned low. The wind has forgotten your name. The day has left, and it's not coming back until it's had some rest too. And you? You've done everything right. Not because of what you did today. Not because you're especially enlightened or efficient or organized. But because you showed up, you lay down, you listened, you breathed. That's all Beatrice ever did. And it was always enough. This whole journey we've taken together, through the dirt floor cottages and goats with opinions and sleeping beside storms, was never really about history. It was about you. About remembering something your body already knows, that sleep is not a reward. It's a right. That rest isn't optional. It's sacred. And now, it sits here, right behind your eyes, right beneath your ribs, right at the edge of thought, where the words are starting to stretch into something softer than language. Beatrice is long gone now, curled in her bed, the weight of wool over her chest, the quiet warmth of a long, honest day still humming in her bones. No anxiety, no second thoughts, just that final exhale before her mind drifts out of the room. And you stir next. So whatever your breath is doing, follow it. Let it guide you down. Let the voice fade. Let the thoughts loosen. Let the silence take the shape of something solid underneath you. Because you're here. Because you made it. Because you deserve to sleep the way the peasants did. Not in luxury, not in silence, but in peace. Sleep well, friend. I'll see you again when the dark comes calling.